Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I am also drawn to the tale of the Conservative minister who, I need to triple check all of this, that it's been suggested that if you have 10 kids and no money, you might want to consider having a vasectomy. I appreciate the demonisation of the poor is a large part of the current project undertaken by the right-wing media, but I think it's very important to choose your targets correctly. And we will find out whether or not Ben Bradley has rendered himself a correct target for the fury of disapproval. Let's stop talking about everything in terms of fury and outrage. It's so hyperbolic. For the disapproval and I think a degree of disgust that many people have expressed as a result. It's a story, of course, that leads back to Ian Duncan Smith, because these comments were taken in support of, you remember Ian Duncan Smith, in support of some of his changes at the Department of Work and Pensions. And I always think of Ian Duncan Smith, that sounds a little odd, I always think of Ian Duncan Smith when looking at statistical analysis of political stories, because we all have little penny drop moments, don't we? We all have little kind of episodes and experiences that really clarify our understanding of an issue. And back in the days when Conservative ministers would speak to me, there was an astonishing exchange with Ian Duncan Smith, this is going back quite a while, about unemployment figures. And he told me more people are in work than ever before, which was factually correct. But it occurred to me at the time that there are more people alive than ever before. We hear a lot about population growth in this country, sometimes in sensible conversations, sometimes in conversations designed to make everyone terrified of immigrants. But the inexorable rise in the number of people living on this planet is a matter of historical fact. So I was struck at the time by how disingenuous it was to suggest that there are more people in work than ever before. Percentages, of course, are very different. So the percentage of people not in work, it could be at a historic low, and employment in this country at the moment is actually quite high. But the notion that if there are more people in work than ever before, in a world where you're neglecting to acknowledge that there are more people alive, or in a country where there are more people of working age than ever before, it's a slightly, do you see what I mean? It's a slightly different proposal. And the reason I mention that is that the government's response to claims today, and this figure is from NHS Digital, the government's response that the NHS is hemorrhaging nurses will be, if it hasn't already happened, to point out that there are more nurses than there used to be. And that is something that I want to bear in mind. I want you to bear in mind as we launch this discussion. But to begin with, 8 minutes after 10. To begin with, what would you say as a nurse explains the reason why 33,000 walked away last year? Okay? And that is, I think, the only way to do this story, certainly the only way to begin it, is to ask nurses. It's odd sometimes to reflect how novel this approach has become in recent years. When talking about nurses, talk to nurses. Not exclusively, but first and foremost. When talking about firefighters, talk to firefighters. When talking about police, talk to police. When talking about teachers, talk to teachers. That is at odds slightly with the way things tend to be done in Britain at this point in our history. When talking about nurses, talk to people who think that nurses are having any, talk to the government, talk to politicians. When talking about nurses, talk to people who aren't nurses. That I don't know. I could be on a hiding to nothing, but it seems to me really important. And what it does also, and I really, really want to stress this, what it does also is open the door to explanations that aren't linked to either, because the two big political beasts in this story will be Brexit and government incompetence, or the popular perception that Jeremy Hunt is trying to keep the NHS up and running for just long enough to allow private investment to buy up ever bigger chunks of the outfit. That's an opinion, not a fact, that many people hold. So it may well be that you can give a reason why what nursing leaders today describe as a dangerous and downward spiral isn't attributable, or isn't exclusively attributable, to these two enormous beasts, political beasts, Brexit and the widespread fear, we can call it a fear, can't we? The widespread fear that there is a project afoot to dismantle the NHS as we know it and put a lot of its services in the hands of companies like Carillion. Obviously it won't be Carillion because Carillion's gone bust, but companies like Carillion will be the ones at the front of the queue to hoover up contracts currently still contained within the public sector. I think that's fair, isn't it? 11 minutes after 10, you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'll tell you some of the stuff that troubles me the most. More than half of those who walked away in the last year were under the age of 40. In the past 3 years, more than 10% of the nursing workforce has left NHS employment in each of the past 3 years. Each of the past 3 years. I presume that this excludes natural wastage, retirement, people who've reached the end of their working life. This is people electing to leave the NHS while still of working age. The gap between the number of people leaving and the number of people joining was 3,000 last year. I have seen a graph, and I tried to dig it out this morning and failed. My apologies. I have seen a graph which confirms that thing I suggested to you at the outset, that the gross number of nurses may well have gone up, but the number of people joining has been overtaken by the number of people leaving. That's the biggest gap over the 5-year period that's been examined. Some people argue that Brexit has had an impact. They say that since the referendum, the NHS has gone from EU joiners outnumbering leavers to the other way round. There are now more EU leavers than joiners. But I think, again, in total, there'll still be more EU nurses on the NHS payroll than there were, for example, 5 years ago. There's a lot to cover here, and you can tell I'm trying to leave the door open for answers other than Conservative policy and Brexit, which of course is now also a Conservative policy. 12 minutes after 10 is the time. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. I think, would you mind if we limit it to nurses for the first sort of section of the programme? Is that okay? I think we should, personally. Nurses past or present, of course. If you have left the NHS while still being of working age, then you are actually the story that we are discussing. 0345 60 60973 is the number you need. Other parts of the UK also experiencing problems. Northern Ireland and Scotland, leaver rates are rising. Not quite as high in any of the regions, any of the other parts of the United Kingdom as in England. In Wales, again, more leavers than joiners, according to the Freedom of Information. But the problem I have, or one of the many problems I have with a story such as this, is the fact that secure work is quite hard to find. And I don't know what you're going to do instead. I appreciate some people will join agencies and reluctantly add to some of the problems faced by the NHS, because the minute that you do a shift as an agency nurse, then there's a bit of money being creamed off the top to go to the agency, isn't there? And nurses routinely report that they get paid a little bit more themselves. So that would be a worry. But if you quit as a nurse, what do you do instead? And are the wages now so low? I know we've had a freeze on public sector pay since about 2010. Are the wages now so low in real terms that you don't care what you're going to do next? It's got a sort of Brexit feel to it. You just want to stop what's happening now. You don't care what the future is going to hold. You want to take your car to the scrapyard and you'll worry about how you're going to get home once it's been crushed. 0345 60 60973. They do amazing work. I was in an NHS hospital last week, and not only was I very, very well looked after, there was a little bit of a bureaucratic bungle where I've been sitting in the waiting room for an hour, just beginning to wonder as the crowd's thinned out whether or not the computer registering, you know, when you press buttons on a computer to tell them that you're there, I was just beginning to wonder, because no human being had said my name, I was just beginning to wonder whether something had gone wrong when my phone rang, my mobile phone rang in the waiting room, and it was the hospital asking where I was. And I said, I'm in the waiting room. And she said, well, I'm in the office next door. And I said, well, if I wave, will you see me? And she said, yes. So I did. And she waved back. And that was... So I appreciate it's not perfect, but my goodness me, in terms of the medical care I received, it was faultless. And I told you at the time that a lovely lady called Kay stopped me in the waiting room to insist. We were at the eye hospital, so this was nothing to do with the treatment she was receiving that day, but she stopped me in the waiting room to insist that I take a moment on the next day's programme to compliment the NHS in general and the staff at the Royal Marsden and the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital here in London in particular for looking after her while she had treatment for her lung cancer. So I was amazed that I remembered to do that. I even set an alarm. So that's another point to make, is that a lot of people leaving the NHS were presumably doing so with a really, really heavy heart. 0345 60 973. Or, and I think this is important as well, you've left the NHS, you'll be part of this statistic because you don't want to be a nurse anymore. You've decided to do something else. That's perfectly reasonable. It's got nothing to do with it. It could be no reflection at all upon the state of the NHS and simply a reflection upon the state of your life. 16 minutes after 10. 0345 60 973 is the number you need. Why are so many nurses leaving the NHS in England and other parts of the United Kingdom each year? Why? You know, because you're living it. I don't know, because I'm just watching it. You tell me and everybody else who is listening.
Good morning. We're going to talk about the NHS again today. No apologies for that. At a time when the NHS is under extraordinary pressure with long waiting times and cancelled operations, it's perhaps no surprise that thousands of nurses are choosing to leave the profession. Figures for England given to the BBC show the numbers leaving outnumbered new joiners by 3,000 last year. The government says action is being taken to solve the shortage and points to a big increase in training places. But the Royal College of Nursing says many of those leaving are demoralised, and that won't change without better pay and conditions. If you are a nurse considering leaving the profession or have recently left, do let me know your reasons why. In a moment, we'll speak to our correspondent Dominic Hughes, who's at Birmingham's Children's Hospital. But first, let's hear from a nurse who felt she had no choice but to quit the NHS.
I would often be brought to tears during my shifts because there was just so much pressure on me. When I graduated, I was so excited. I really wanted to do a job where I could make a difference and help people. But I've found, as time has gone by on the wards, that things have just got more and more stressful, and we've been under more and more pressure. I felt like I wasn't giving good care to my patients, or the care that they deserved rather, because there just wasn't enough time, and because I was so stressed and run down, I wasn't being as caring as I know I could be. I ended up having a couple of months off sick for stress and depression, and my GP said that she felt the main trigger for me was work. I'm not sure exactly what I'll be doing in the future, but I'm just really sad that I can't be a nurse in the NHS without sacrificing my mental health for it.
Well, let's go back to Birmingham Children's Hospital, where Dominic is this morning. Hi, Dominic.
Yes, good morning. We're in the clinical research facility here at Birmingham Children's Hospital, where the aim is to try and produce new drugs, new treatments to help sick children. Now, we're looking at the work of the UK's nurses right across the BBC today, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by one of those nurses, Lucy Cooper. Now, Lucy, thank you very much for joining us this morning. You are a research advanced nurse practitioner. That is a great job title. What does it mean?
So working in the NHS Clinical Research Facility has allowed me to advance my nursing skills while maintaining patient focus, so I can undertake advanced skills and still maintain looking after the patients.
So what do you actually do?
So I bridge the gap between the doctors and the nurses, so supporting the research nurses, but also relieving some of the doctors' duties by taking on some of my own visits with patients and participating in research, undertaking cannulation, blood sampling, and other advanced nursing skills.
So yeah, quite advanced stuff you're doing. What's the ultimate aim here?
It's to generally improve the health and wealth of the whole of the nation, and we're doing that by seeing patients not just locally, nationally, but internationally as well here in the CRF.
And I've heard your role is quite unique. There aren't very many of you, are there?
No, to my knowledge, I'm the only paediatric research nurse, advanced nurse in the whole of the UK.
So when you started out on your nursing career, did you envisage you would end up doing this kind of job? Because it is quite different, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite different to the traditional nursing job.
It is. So yes, I did actually. When I was first doing my nurse training, that's where my passion for research stemmed from, undertaking some very little piece of research, and it was there that I knew that that's ultimately where I wanted my career to go. And then when this facility opened 10 years ago was when I first came here, and they've allowed me to advance my skills and to take new training.
Because how important is it then that there are opportunities like the one you've seized, and that with some of the other nurses we've heard from this morning who've taken on those new roles? How important is it that those roles are there to encourage people to stay in their profession?
It's so important. We're nurses, that's what we're here for. We love the patient contact, and this role has allowed me to take on my career and pursue a higher level, but also stay really focused to being a nurse, and that's really important to me, and still being able to see the patients, give that reassuring hand on a family's shoulder, play with the children, but also developing my skills and delivering that high level of research quality care.
Because 20 years ago, say for example, that role might not have been there. If you wanted to advance your career, it was what, you had to go into management?
Yeah, and that's the whole point. This role allows you to advance your skills and stay clinically focused, but become more senior as a nursing and so you can career.
And so do you think that is going to help those sort of younger nurses entering the profession now to see a future?
Yeah, it gives you that aspiration to work harder and knowing that there is future goals where you can stay really patient focused.
Given your experience in the career itself, can you appreciate that some younger nurses sort of try it for a couple of years and then think this isn't for me? Because it's a hard job, isn't it?
It is hard. The shift work, the patient demands, it's ever changing. The goalposts are always moving, but we like to think that we're reactive to that, and that opportunities like this are going to spur people on to stay in the profession and give them that goal to work forward and to know that they've got a lifelong career in nursing.
What do you think are the qualities then that you need in order to make a go of this career? Because it's not easy.
No, and within research you've got your normal core skills that any generic nurse has, but over and above those in research you have to have meticulous skills in maintaining patient safety, IT skills, management, leadership skills, which we ask of a very junior in their career.
Okay, Lucy, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing the wisdom that you've garnered over your career as a nurse. We will be looking at the work of the UK's nurses right across the BBC all today, so stay tuned for more details. Back to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Thank you, Lucy. Here with us now, two nurses who've spent many years working in the NHS. Joanne Shaglowski, who is considering giving up her job. And also Rohit Sagu, who now teaches student nurses. He's also founder of British Sikh Nurses. Welcome, both of you. Thank you. You're considering leaving after 20 years. Are you going to?
Yes, I think
you are.
I am, because it's something that has been coming on for a while. I've put things in place to have a new career. And
but why? Why are you leaving?
Because things in the NHS have changed. Bear in mind that I started my training in 1994. So at that point, we had the Project 2000 for nurses. We were really supported. We had our bursary. We even had subsidised living. So at that point, I literally was living in the nurses' home, surrounded by other nurses, and it was amazing. I qualified in 1997, and I went on to work in haematology, general medicine, and intensive care. And although it was hard work at the time, I felt valued, I felt supported. But over the years, as the pressures on the NHS have got greater, that support and that value has changed for me. I've worked in many different areas. I had a time where I actually went into the corporate world, but after a while I realised that I missed the hands-on nursing, and that's when I went back into the NHS.
But won't you miss that now?
I think I will, but what it is that I feel that the level of care that I'm giving has been compromised. I work in a busy GP surgery. We literally have 10 minutes to see patients, and now I feel that I'm not being true to myself, because I'll give you an example. Recently I had a lady who came in for a simple injection, but I'd read her medical notes and I knew that she was suffering from cancer and it was terminal. I literally had less than 10 minutes because of the pressures, so I knew that I had to get this patient in and out of my room. Now, how is that being a healthcare professional caring for people?
And you had to do that because you've got a queue of people presumably in the surgery outside also waiting to see you.
Yeah.
Right.
So I felt that I wasn't being authentic, I wasn't giving the care that that lady needed. And really, probably, she just needed a little bit of a chat, a little bit of time to talk, but that's not something I was able to offer her.
OK, let me bring in Rohit. First of all, how do you react to the fact that a colleague of yours has just decided after 20 years she's going?
It's very sad to see you leave the profession. As a nurse myself, I think the profession is great. It's fantastic. As nursing as a concept, we often view nurses as a uniformed person that you're on the ward and etc. But there's vast amount to nursing, as we've already seen from what Lucy had said as well. And that career, it's a career, it's a profession that spans, and it's really sad that you're going to, it's going to be a loss to nursing, just like many others that leave.
And it's not just people like Joanne who've been in the profession for 2 decades who are leaving, it's actually relatively new recruits who are leaving. Now, you trained student nurses, why do you think that's happening?
I mean, the training that we provide for student nurses is robust. It's very, and student nurses are exposed to the pressures and the challenges of the NHS that we're facing at the moment.
So it's not that they're underprepared?
No, they're not underprepared at all. They're totally prepared for that, and that when they get out into their eventual jobs and they qualify as well, they're still relatively doing the jobs that they were doing. And most places, actually, their last placements that they have, most wards take them on for a job, permanent job within their last training practice areas.
So why are they going there?
Yeah, I mean, there is challenging times at the moment.
Right.
I think we all know there are challenging times in the NHS at the moment. And, it's busy, it's getting busier, the ageing population, there's a lot more people, using the service as much as possible.
Janine has emailed, I'm a highly experienced nurse practitioner. I've recently left the profession after 38 years of active service. I'm constantly being asked to reconsider returning, but I feel exhausted from the continued pressures and the daily expectation to work over my rostered hours. It is sad to say my profession has deteriorated to such an extent. I'm ashamed of what it now stands for and the appalling care I am forced to give due to lack of staff. Now, you will know that the Department of Health says there are nearly 12,000 more nurses on our wards since May 2010. What would you say to that, both of you?
Well, I think it's evident that, nurses like myself are having to make the decision. And I myself have decided that I'm no longer going to put myself through the stress and leave work at the end of the day feeling dissatisfied. So I'm probably one of the lucky ones in the fact that I've come up with a plan. So I actually last year decided to retrain, and I picked a company called Digital Mums, who offer women like me, mothers, the opportunity to retrain. So I've retrained in social media marketing, and this new role is going to offer me the flexibility, it's going to offer me the work-life balance that I need now.
A subject that we're covering in the next half hour of the programme, actually, the work-life balance. Rohit, 12,000 more nurses on our ward since May 2010.
I mean,
say the Department of Health?
That says a lot in terms of it. And what we need to think about, I know that we've had figures today that nurses are leaving the profession, but what we need to think about is retention. How do we retain those 12,000?
What's
and
the
that's
answer briefly?
fundamental. Strategically, how we do it is we need to explore opportunities for enhancing their training. Just as we've seen from Lucy, that's just turned around and said she's enhanced her, she's a single practitioner in the UK, and that's what we need to concentrate on, and the government needs to realise that as well.
Thank you both. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank
in
you.
your new career. Thank you very much,
Thank
Rohit.
you.
Thanks for coming on the programme.
Any word yet from that bastion of free speech and honest journalism, the Sun newspaper? Are you keen to talk to the editor about a little article about me in there today? Have we heard back yet? It's all right, still early. 20 after 10 is the time. His name's Tony Gallagher, in case you were wondering. Used to be at the Telegraph. Now at the Sun, both, of course, owned by Brexit-supporting billionaires who have much of their money registered offshore. 21 minutes, I can't imagine what he's got against me, can you? 21 minutes after 10 is the time. Back to the NHS and the very important question of it's twofold, isn't it? Why are nurses leaving the NHS in such numbers? And can we try to accrue some certainty that it either is or isn't because of government policy and or Brexit? Vicky is in Sandhurst. Vicky, what can you tell us?
Hello, yes. Well, I was just ringing because I actually only qualified about 2.5 years ago. I went back to university at 40. And I started off in a hospital post-qualification.
Yes.
And only lasted a year. It was, I mean, I aged, I think, about 10 years in that year. It was so stressful.
You've got nothing to compare it to, have you, except your life as a non-nurse? But it obviously became clear pretty quickly that this was nothing like what you had been led to expect. Is that a fair comment?
No, it is, because obviously I was a student in hospital for 3 years. But
Yes.
the pressure suddenly post-qualification is tenfold. And although I absolutely loved the job, I found it was just very stressful. And I've come into the community. I'm community nursing now, which, again, I absolutely love. But again, you know, still feeling the pressures, the stress of seeing so many patients. And, you know, I'm very lucky to work in such a fantastic community, and I do get a lot of support. But I know there are certain communities that don't have the support that I have, and it is very, very stressful.
How I mean, what was there a straw that broke the camel's back for you, Vicky, or was there?
In the hospital,
Yeah.
in the hospital, I think I was pressured from very early on, post qualification, that to have 12 patients straight off, and I worked on a cardiac ward. And I did refuse, but had to do it on my nighttime shift. And I had a couple of particularly bad shifts where I had emergencies, and there's only you and one care assistant for 12 patients.
So do you get frightened in though? Because I understand what stress and fatigue are, but it sounds to me as if fear is part of this process as well.
Of course, it's really concerning. I mean, you know, we're only human. You know, we want to do the very best we can for our patients. But yeah, it was. There are certain, you know, situations where you felt at your depth. You have at night time, certainly, you have very limited doctors on call who could be dealing with other emergencies on other wards. You know, and unless you're at that stage where you have to do a crash call, you know, you're waiting for a doctor and you're dealing with these people, you know, and it was really pressurised, and I felt at that point, I just don't feel.
But this is the worst. This is the worst sort of vicious circle. You're leaving because you're overworked, which is presumably in part because you're understaffed, and because you're overworked and understaffed, you're reducing the staffing levels personally.
Yeah, you know, and you feel bad. You know, there is a real good camaraderie amongst
I mean,
the
do you
staff.
know what,
we
Vicky?
support.
All of these services seem to me to rely increasingly upon the decency and the camaraderie of the individuals involved. It's almost as if we've embarked upon an experiment to see how badly we can treat them and how little we can pay them before those human qualities, which of course are independent of any free market ideologies, those human qualities of decency, vocation and camaraderie begin to splinter, and they splintered a bit for you.
They did, yeah, they certainly did in the hospital. It was just too much, and it affected. I found that I was working more, and my family life was affected then. And you know, that's something I didn't want to happen. And although I absolutely loved the job, on my days off I was just exhausted. So coming into the community has been absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love it. But again, not.
So you're
I
still
don't
in the
feel-
NHS then? So you're not actually part
I
of
am.
the leaving the NHS exodus?
No. I mean, yeah, I'm, still as part of the NHS in the community, and I feel, for me personally, it's better, copable, and I love it. But if you get down to the wages and whatever, it's lucky we absolutely love our jobs, because if I wasn't married, if I was a single person with children or whatever, there's no way I'd be able to cope. I wouldn't be able to do it. Couldn't sustain it at all.
I'm grateful to you. It's a perfect start. I mean, I could detain you for a little bit longer and go through the finances, but I'll do that with another caller, Vicky, I think, because it's a deal breaker. Eventually there comes a point, as Vicky suggests, where if you weren't part of a partnership, economically speaking, and of course romantically and socially, then you wouldn't be able to sustain yourself if you worked in this job. The signposts to this sort of thing. For me, one of the signposts, oddly, was when my kids started at primary school, and I was a little bit saddened by how far away a lot of their teachers lived, because we live in quite a nice part of London, and a lot of the teachers at the kids' primary schools couldn't afford to rent the kind of property they wanted to live in near to the school in which they were teaching. So they were living much further out. I mean, I didn't say much further out. Like, walking distance was clearly off the agenda entirely. But but 2 or 3 of them, we were talking like spending well over an hour travelling to school in the morning. And this is another thing that's going to discriminate against public sector workers in London and other big cities, isn't it? In that if you want to get to work, it's going to be an increasingly difficult prospect and an increasingly expensive business. Numbers are simple. 10:27 is the time. Why have you left the NHS? Vicky has left hospital nursing just a year after becoming fully qualified, but she hasn't left the NHS in full. And how do the rest of us assemble evidence, or indeed accrue certainty that it is because of politics? You know my theory about Jeremy Hunt, which I really hate, but I think it's true. As you look at what NHS people tell you on a daily basis, and then you look at Jeremy Hunt being given more duties in the last cabinet reshuffle, and you begin to conclude, I think, that his job really is to keep a lid upon the encroaching chaos, to keep a lid upon these problems, to appear on radio and television and be plausible and reassuring, despite the fact that NHS Digital's own figures show that 1 in 10, more than 10% of the nursing workforce have left NHS employment in each of the past 3 years. Caveat, of course, people have joined in that period as well, but 2 things that worry me: the number of leavers now outnumbers the number of joiners, and more than half of those who walked away in the last year were under the age of 40. Put it into the simplest of terms, for those of us with very little medical training or understanding, or none whatsoever, like Vicky did. Tell us about why you couldn't do it anymore, okay? 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. The time is 10:28. Why could you not do it anymore? And it won't just be nurses, it'll be nursing assistants as well. And again, I think, regardless of how determined people are to hear what they want to hear, the report says Brexit may have had an impact. Not that Brexit has had an impact. So that's something that we don't put out unchallenged. We simply ask the people living the story, rather than reporting it or commenting on it, what their understanding of the reality is. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. I'm not going to lift the moratorium on non-nurses yet, so there are phone lines free. I suspect that as soon as we lift that moratorium, excuse me, there won't be. So take advantage of it while you can. 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. Why is the NHS, quotes, hemorrhaging, end quotes, nurses? And or why did you join the number of professionals fully trained, at some cost, of course, to both yourself and the taxpayer? Why did you decide to walk away from a job that you had either previously loved or always dreamt of doing? The time is approaching 10:30. We're trying to, I suppose, sort of knit a tapestry of different experiences, different reasons why you have left nursing, why you have quit the NHS. And I appreciate Gracie's reminded me, so I think it merits reading out, that there won't be a single reason that explains every nurse's decision to move away. But politically speaking, you're looking at a pay freeze, you're looking at the abolition of nurse training bursaries, and the closure of some A&Es. So yeah, I think part of the problem is, and I promise you I would have said this even if today I hadn't seen the Sun launch an appallingly ill-sourced and ill-informed hatchet job on me, but it does appear to be that anybody who begins pointing out the obvious with regard to some right-wing ideologies that are going unchallenged in this country ends up becoming a sort of public enemy, according to the owners of right-wing media and the editors. Because if you think about it in these terms, the pay has been frozen, training bursaries have been abolished, and staffing is low. That means every single nurse going to work is having a demonstrably inferior experience from either what they expected when they started their training or what they experienced when they started their work as a nurse. So I know that Noam Chomsky line has become a little bit hackneyed about you defund and demoralise to a point where privatisation seems like an acceptable option. So what I'd really like you to do, if you are normally quite dismissive of any suggestion that this is part of a process to turn the NHS into the kind of cash cow that our railways have become, and to allow companies like Carillion to start hoovering up contracts that would once have been within the public sector, then you tell me what's going on. I am going to lift the moratorium on non-nurses. How do you explain it? Those three things, it seems to me. So a pay freeze, the abolition of training bursaries, and reported shortages on a fairly grand scale, they create deliberately a horrible working environment for the nurses that are still there. It's almost as if they're doing everything they can to chase people out of the profession. Or, to be slightly more charitable, they are very cynically relying upon the decency and the sense of vocation that these people have, because generally sociopaths and the like aren't drawn to the nursing profession. They're relying on that so cynically, and embarked upon some sort of experiment to find out just how close to the bone they can cut a nurse before they object. And in many ways, the only objection they can register is to walk away. Do you see what I mean when I put it like that? It feels deliberate. Again, happy to be corrected. But if I was thinking about becoming a nurse and the abolition of the training bursary and the pay freeze was shown to me, I'd rethink becoming a nurse. And if I was already a nurse and I was thinking of leaving, the fact that the staffing levels are going down and my pay is not going up. In fact, my pay is going down in real terms, isn't it? Because it's not keeping up with inflation. So if I was already a nurse, my job's getting harder, my pay's getting worse. If I was thinking of becoming a nurse, I don't get a bursary, and the money is pathetic. You just persuade me it's not deliberate. If we normally find ourselves at odds politically, give me a ring today and explain why you're confident it's not deliberate. I don't think either of us can prove that it is or it isn't either way. But just talk me through your reasoning, because I'd actually really value it. The alternative is gross and grim. David is in Leeds. David, what would you like to say?
For me, my wife is also a nurse, so am I. We both left the NHS. There was 3 or 4 factors for me. One was the cost of living. I was just about making ends meet, but literally it was just like £100 spare. So if a problem happened, we would go into our credit cards and debt would mount up, and it would just be too much of a problem. We were living in London at the time.
Right.
And the cost of rental, and to be honest with you, people, in my experience in London, are very much, well, if you can't afford it, it's your problem.
What people were? Your bosses?
My bosses.
Or your mates?
Even people I know who own property. It's that feeling of it's all about themselves, if you get what I mean. Don't help other people. And it really feeds into that. And the debt was getting a lot. So, we decided, I left the profession first.
How long were you a nurse for?
Just over 6 years.
And what were you on? What was your salary at the end of that period?
Well, it was 27 and a half I was on. I was working in CCU, which is cardiology, which was one of the ladies that rang up earlier. And I was an experienced nurse. The problem for me is, what people don't realise is, as a nurse, you have higher costs because you have longer hours of childcare.
Of course, no, it's the same with police. I do understand this. I remember a call a couple of years ago. You're probably busy, but it was a policewoman telling us that she has to meet her husband in a lay-by to hand over the child because of their shift patterns. And that kind of thing should stop us all in our tracks, but it doesn't for the reasons you highlight. You'll have somebody on the other side shouting, "Oh, get over it. If you can't afford it, you should move," or something like that.
Yeah, and when you arrive late for nursery, the nursery fine you. And the embarrassment for me on one occasion, I worked out that the fine for arriving late was literally about a third of my day's salary. 15 minutes late for the nursery, and then it cost me a third of salary. And then I got a parking ticket, and I just decided I can't do this anymore. And then the second factor was guilt. As a nurse, you feel guilt all the time about the care you provide, the standard of service, and I'm probably going to break my own rule of being too honest and say patients passing away when they don't need to.
Oh, mate. That was what the last caller just knocked on the door of, wasn't it? That fear of being not just present for an avoidable tragedy, but in some sense, and you know how nuanced this word is, but in some sense you would feel responsible, even though you're not. It's circumstances and political decisions, but you would feel responsible. I'm
going to say the guilt factor actually is because you can't say what you truly feel. I can say it now because
you're not there anymore.
I'm not there anymore, and if they took me to the Nursing Midwifery Council, I'll happily go. It doesn't bother me. I can financially afford to fight them.
Gosh.
I'm in a position now where I'm in a good position finationally. So
you would, because I don't know enough about the nursing world. I don't know enough about anything, to be honest with you, David. But your fear would be that a nurse in post still to come out and say there are people dying on my ward who do not need to die. That you wouldn't do that for fear of professional repercussions.
It's literally this. If you admit, so let's say I point to a patient and say, Wednesday afternoon, that patient died because, okay, the lady that you had on before was 2 years post-registration. She should not be in charge on her own on a night shift on a cardiology
But this,
unit.
with the hemorrhaging of nurses, this scenario becomes more likely.
Yes, but there's actually the interesting scenario. Even though the manager puts her in place and it goes all wrong and the person dies, if she's honest and says that person shouldn't have died, it was my error, there's only one person that would end up losing their job and their nursing license, and that is that nurse that you spoke to before. That is why she probably left. The pressure is...
And of course, the newspapers would pile in if something went wrong, because all they want is a target and a scapegoat for that day. And it isn't going to be Jeremy Hunt that gets a kicking from the Sun or the Mail. It's going to be the poor nurse who was on duty when something horrible happened.
Yeah, and the truth is as well, the union doesn't really speak out because they're generally a politer union in that sense. They're not as aggressive as some of the railway unions are seen as. So it's sort of like you're stuck between, do you throw yourself under the bus in the sense of admit the fact that actually you know patients are dying on a regular basis that wouldn't die in other healthcare systems, or do you just go, okay, well, I think I'll leave? And if you're on a 12-bedded ward...
I just swore, David. I'm so sorry. I've had to dump the last 10 seconds of the programme. There was something that you said to me that prompted something of a profanity to escape my lips. So take that as a compliment, because I don't think anyone's ever pushed me to that position on the programme before. So it was a fairly mild expletive, but I think on reflection, I'm right to excise it. So you go back, if you don't mind, just to that simple statement that people were... I can't even say it out loud. You genuinely believe, 6 years a nurse, your wife as well, that people are dying unnecessarily because of staffing issues within the NHS?
Yes, because what happens is, I've worked in also A&E, I've worked in resus, and my experience is what you do is you deal with the most sick first. And there's this uncomfortable position that if you, let's say, leave someone when they're very, very sick, you may not always get an opportunity to deal with the problem and they die. If you are totally honest some days, you know that if you'd seen them earlier and the doctor had seen them earlier, there is a very good chance they wouldn't have passed away.
So people are leaving the profession because they don't feel that they can fulfil their own criteria for professionalism.
Yeah. And the guilt is, you know, the hardness is, as a nurse, you feel, okay, there's a really good example of this that actually the nursing profession learned in 2006. Do you remember there was a program about Nurse Undercover in Panorama years ago?
Yes.
2006. She went into a Surrey hospital. I won't say which one, but a Surrey hospital. Do you know she lost her licence for 2 years
because she was a whistleblower? Dr. Phil Hammond's done a lot of work on this. The idea that the whistleblowers end up being the ones getting sanctioned or punished or penalised in some way, because they may well be in breach of some contractual obligation, but I think the moral obligation for some people will outweigh the contractual obligation, even if you end up getting a kicking.
It wasn't the contractual obligation. She actually got to the equivalent of the GMC, which is the General Medical Council, for us is the NMC. The Nursing Midwifery Council actually removed her licence in a public hearing. It wasn't a contractual obligation. They said, and the interesting thing is that the nurse that hit the patient on that video, which was watched by millions of people, got a warning from the hospital and no sanction. The nurse that breached confidentiality of the patients by having a video camera lost her license. That sent a message in 2006 to all of us.
Which was don't police yourselves, don't put your head above the parapet, don't do anything that could get your... Because also, I mean, it limits your ability to nurse. I make no apology for talking at great length to the callers today, because if I have a caller I can learn from, I'll keep them around for as long as I'm learning, with the obvious caveats of commercial breaks, travel news and news headlines, because, forgive me for being a little bit behind the curve, if the hemorrhaging of staff reported today from the NHS is even close to fair, and our callers, the plural of anecdote is not data, but our callers back up this data, then the nurses still toiling away at the coalface of the National Health Service will be daily feeling that their experience is deteriorating. It's sort of a really perfect circle of cynicism. It's bad, so people are leaving. People leaving make it worse. The worse it gets, the wider the door opens for private sector companies like Carillion, if it still existed, to pile in and get all the contracts that used to be handled in-house. And whatever, well, you see, the Carillion story is horrible and fascinating at the same time, because it's not a bailout in the way that some of the reports, this is my opinion, it's not a bailout in the way that some of the reports describe it. There is a responsibility to keep paying the wages for public sector workers in the interim while they come up with they'll be re-tendering for these contracts and what have you. But the biggest of the losses will be borne by the shareholders and the debtors, the companies to whom Carillion owes money. Now, if those contracts had still been national public sector contracts, if the Department of Housing had been responsible for some of the building contracts Carillion has, I'm pretty sure that the subcontractors owed money by Carillion would still be on the hook for that money. But because it's private sector, the government actually, it's not taxpayers bailing out Carillion. It is small and medium-sized firms and subcontractors and employees who are bailing out the boat that is sinking because of the amount of money that was taken out of it in previous years to give to shareholders and executives and board members. And that's why I worry about the privatisation of the NHS, not for ideological reasons, but because I somehow struggle to see how, if you prioritise profit over patient care, how it can't end ultimately as disastrously as Carillion has ended. 10:53 is the time. 03456060973. Why do you want to leave? Why did you leave? Or why do you think so many nurses are leaving? And I need some answers that perhaps challenge the Labour narrative that this is part of an ongoing process of privatisation. For me, that's where the evidence leads. But I have occasionally gone down the wrong path in pursuit of the truth. We didn't yesterday, by the way, that Yorkshire Post story about the Labour MP Jared O'Mara going absent without leave, as it were, from his constituency duties. You'll remember he was suspended from the Labour Party after a catalogue of misogynistic and homophobic tweets were found in his historic social media account. But what the Yorkshire Post reported yesterday was he hasn't been turning up for work at his constituency office either, which he was supposed to do. He was signed off sick from parliamentary duties, but he was supposed to be carrying on with his constituency duties. Yorkshire Post reported yesterday that he wasn't. We spoke to the Yorkshire Post, and today he's announced he's going straight back to work in both his constituency office and Parliament. 10:54 is the time. Back to the NHS. Dawn is in Hemel Hempstead. Dawn, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Yes, it's just I'm working for the NHS at the moment, but I'm looking to leave because it's so dangerously understaffed that I'm concerned I'm going to end up losing my PIN.
That's your nursing licence.
Yes, sorry.
This is. I mean, you're the third or fourth person to cite this, and that is literally all I'm getting on the switchboard. This is. I know that the plural of anecdote isn't data, but this puts you in the position where either you stay there and run the risk of losing your nursing licence, or you leave. And forgive me, Dawn, because
situation worse.
I know you know this. Yes.
Exactly. The only reason I've stayed as long as what I have is because of my colleagues. They're fantastic, you know, but the general morale amongst staff is very low. But for example, take a drug round. It's supposed to only have 8 patients, invariably have 12.
Yeah.
You're wearing a tabard that says drug round, do not disturb. But you've got 6 patients desperately needing the toilet. You've got a patient that's about to fall out of bed. You've got a patient having maybe a low hypo, you know, where they need the sugar. You know, you can't then continue with your drug rounds. You've also got admissions coming in. You've got discharges to sort out. And all you've got is one healthcare assistant helping you. Because I noticed we're talking a lot about nurses leaving.
Yeah, but nursing assistants are hitting the road as well, aren't they?
Absolutely, and they are the real backbone. We need them desperately. They do so much of the slog, if you like.
I hear you. How long have you been a nurse?
10 years.
Can you? That's almost perfect timing, isn't it, for the next question? Can you? Is there a tipping point, or has it just been over the whole 10 years, going back to the last Labour government? There's been a slow decline, a sense of the chipping away. Or was there a moment where you felt, it might be both actually, and then there was a moment where you felt, whoa, this is big now?
I think actually just a month ago, we were seriously short-staffed as usual, and my colleagues were snapping at each other.
Yeah.
No teamwork.
People who like each other. The camaraderie that's replacing proper pay, bursaries and staffing is now straining. Is now struggling
because we don't get paid for our breaks, but no one's taking their break because they don't have time to take their break. It's not safe for staff to leave the ward to take their break because then your staffing levels are even lower. And so people are hungry, they're desperate for the loo, and it just, you know, you can't snap at the patient. You have to be completely professional with the patient.
And if you do snap at the patient, then you could have the wrath of Khan coming down upon your head. Not Sadiq Khan, I'm referring to an old Star Trek film. You could be in all sorts of trouble. How? And this is going to sound like a really daft question, but you know, I speak as I find. How can I find a nurse who's going to explain things in a slightly less bleak and negative way? Because I am currently really struggling. Where would I go?
I don't think you will.
Well, I have to try. I'm going to carry on after the 11 o'clock news for this because I have to try. I want to find a nurse who can describe or absorb all of the things that we've been told by other nurses, like Dawn, or ex-nurses like David, and put an interpretation upon the evidence that doesn't lead us to such a grisly conclusion. But you don't hold out much hope.
I don't. It's incredibly sad. And now that they've also switched from paperwork to putting care plans and things on computer, that takes even more time. And relatives see you sitting at a computer and think you're not doing any work, and you know they need to come and talk to you about their relative.
Yeah.
And there is not enough. You do a 12-and-a-half-hour shift, and that's not long enough to get everything done.
It's going to be soon the case. It's barely long enough to scratch the surface of what you need to get done. Dawn, thank you for doing what you do. I would add that I urge you not to leave the NHS, but equally I can't do that with a clean conscience because I'm not sure I could carry, even without a vocation. I'm not sure I could contemplate the kind of conditions that we're having described to us. There are currently 2 phone lines free. There'll be 3 when Dawn has moved along. And I really, really mean this because it strikes me as somehow significant. Can we find a nurse, a working nurse, who can explain all of the things that we're hearing, the pay freeze, the abolition of bursaries, and the reduction in staffing levels. That's the vicious circle that I feel we haven't paid enough attention to in the past. As Dawn acknowledged herself, she's reaching the point where she can't cope anymore. She will leave, making things even worse and harder for the colleagues that she leaves behind. I need a bit of what I suppose has to be called balance. Any word yet from The Sun? Is the editor prepared to come and talk to me about the story they printed about me today? A chap called Tony Gallagher, formerly of The Telegraph. No? Nothing? Oh, well, make sure they know the invitation is open right up until 1 o'clock and then henceforth from here, because if they're going to print an article about me containing demonstrable untruths that could easily have been avoided if they'd paid me the courtesy of a quick phone call, then the least I can do before describing the demonstrable untruths published by The Sun today would be to offer the editor a right of reply. So do make sure that they know. I'm very, very keen to talk to the editor of The Sun today in the interest of full and frank disclosure, openness and journalistic integrity. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. No reason why they won't come on seriously. You know how this programme works. Everyone gets a fair crack of the whip, and I'm sure the editor of The Sun has the courage of his, I can't really call them convictions, let's call them calumnies. Rosie is in Brixton. Rosie, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Sorry, I should remind people what we're talking about rather than my own little personal navel-gazing psychodrama. We're talking about people leaving the NHS, and you are the nurse to tell me why the analysis that the abolition of bursaries, the cuts, the pay freeze and the decline in staffing levels is not necessarily political and things aren't as bad as all the other callers have told me.
I wish.
Oh.
I'm in a slightly different situation to your previous callers because I actually work on a children's unit.
Okay.
So we find that our staffing ratios are actually fairly good because of legal requirements. We have to have one nurse to 4 patients. However, because obviously because of shifts in, people leaving the NHS, we are much more reliant on agency nurses, which puts a whole other level of demand on a unit because they're not able to care for a lot of the patients that we have. They're not able to manage the medications on their own. They're not able to manage the paperwork by themselves. So you are having to manage them as well as their caseload. This has also been impacted because our bank rates, so that's kind of like the overtime system for the NHS, have been frozen. So I'm a senior staff nurse at band 6, and when I used to do a bank shift, I would get paid as a senior staff nurse at band 6. I now get paid as a junior at band 5. Gosh. So I now don't do bank at my own hospital because it's not cost effective. By the time I found childcare, I've travelled in and I've got home, I'm walking away with about £50, and it's just not worth it, basically. I'm actually one of the people that I've gone part-time, so I kind of came to my inpatient setting and spoke to the teams there and basically said that for my own mental health, I couldn't work more than 6 shifts a month.
Yeah.
And this was a very calculated decision based on pay, which is very, very, very tight. And I may have to go back to doing more shifts because it is so tight. But basically, by being away from the hospital more, I actually managed to enjoy my job more, if that makes sense. Because I can do my one shift and I know that I've got a few days off, and I can do my next shift and know that I've got a few days off. This seems to work at the moment, but whether it will forever, I don't know. And kind of like everybody else has said, I find that where junior doctors have got so much pressure, the senior nurses are becoming more like junior doctors.
Yes.
Which is another...
Where will it end?
...that they've got to manage. I literally don't know.
Have a crack
As you said about the cut in bursary has now affected the kind of nurses, junior nurses that are coming through. So seeing a lot more very, very young, very frightened nurses rather than people like myself who came to nursing profession later in life. And it's very difficult. I'm most of the time the leader of the shift, managing a 20 to 24 bedded unit, 6 nurses, 5 students, agency, 5 different medical teams, people coming in and out of A&E, and it's just really difficult. It's really difficult.
If I keep asking where will it end, are we all going to start crying? Because, I mean, the political answer is that it ends with defunding, which we've already seen, demoralising, which we've already seen, and then possibly deregulating, but certainly privatising. And the idea is that, look, things are so bad, privatisation can't really make anything worse, which I'm a little bit young, I suspect you are as well, to say with certainty that I think that's how the railways ended up being privatised, this sense that, well, it can't be any worse than it is now. But this isn't people's journeys from A to B. This is people's health and lives that we're talking about.
Exactly, and I think as well, interestingly, on my unit, we have now opened, or should I say given up, 2 of our cubicles to become private cubicles. And they are then funded by people who have private health care.
Oh, Lord.
And they are within our ward. So, of course, the positive, I guess, of that is that money we receive from the private cubicles helps fund the rest of the ward. But, of course, it is that kind of trepidation that is this the way the NHS is moving?
This is my problem then, but what do we do? I mean, what do I do professionally? I'm desperately trying to find an analysis of this, but I'm not going to speak to politicians about it because I want to speak to nurses. It seems to me that nurses know more about nursing than politicians do. I'm old-fashioned like that.
Yeah.
And I can't... I check in with Beth. We're literally hanging up on people with stories like yours to tell because we want to speak to somebody from within the nursing profession who will just simply challenge this quite lazy conclusion that it is because of bursaries being abolished, pay being frozen, and staffing levels reaching dangerous levels that more and more people are leaving, which is going to make all of the situations we've just described demonstrably worse. You'd think if staffing levels were going down, they could give a pay rise to everybody that was left because that same amount of money could be spread around a little more thickly.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it feels never ending. I mean, recently we've been told that we need to work towards our degree status because that's what's kind of being set as a level for nurses coming through. So for people like me who got a diploma and not a degree, I now need to train to degree level. But the funding that we get for that has now been cut. So I have to fund the majority of the training, which could be up to £10,000.
I don't know what to do, Beth. Rosie, sorry, the producer's called Beth. I don't know what to do. What do I do? Do I just keep taking calls from people like you until somebody pays attention and every mind in the country is being changed? Because that could take centuries.
I know. It's really sad as well. I mean, the majority of the nurses that you find in this country, we work because we care for our patients. We care for their families. We care that they are well and they get home and, that they have a decent experience. And, of course, as most of your stories have said, that's at the detriment to yourself. When I'm having to work through a lunch break, I don't get paid for that. When I'm leaving an hour late, I don't get paid for that. And actually, I come home later to my own family. And
nobody cares, do they?
No.
You put a foot wrong, someone will come down on you like a ton of bricks. You carry on trying to do your best in these sort of circumstances. And do you ever feel they're laughing at you?
I just feel underappreciated,
yes.
To be quite honest with you. I kind of, similar actually to what someone said before on the whistleblowing, I actually approached my managers and said, the only way you'll be able to understand what it's like in my role as a staff nurse is to put a body camera on me like you have on the police. Yeah. And then you'll be able to see what the demands are on the nursing teams and why you've got juniors crying in the corners and parents getting frustrated and people leaving the profession because it's too hard to explain. It's too hard to put into words. You almost need to be visualising it yourself.
Well, I'm interested. I mean, part of the problem will be, let me just have a quick look at my unmoderated inbox. I should be able to find somebody who fits into this relatively easily. I'm struggling. Oh, no, hang on. We've got one. Here you go, Richard. Why does LBC deliberately wind people up? The NHS cannot cope due to sheer number of patients, not rocket science. LBC should be reporting on government to build new hospitals instead of airing the pointless stories from callers. Richard, checking his profile, almost needless to say, as a proud nationalist who doesn't know how to spell nationalist. But that notion that you're wrong, presumably a Brexit supporter and proud nationalist means he thinks that there are too many immigrants in the NHS. That obviously is a large part of the reason why your voice doesn't get heard properly, because all you need is somebody on the on the sidelines shouting, immigration, immigration, immigration. And then anyone who goes to a hospital sees someone in a waiting room talking in a foreign language or with brown skin, even if they've lived there, their family have lived there for 5 generations, they take that away as proof. So I'm not sure that we can ever fix things as long as this massive mother of all scapegoats remains so front and centre in British politics.
It's very difficult. I mean, we were fortunate enough to win the bid to build a bigger A&E, which was absolutely fantastic, except for the fact we didn't build more wards to cater for the fact more people come to our A&E.
Yeah.
So now, where we were specialist units prior to this change, we are now just a bit of a free-for-all. And I'm caring for patients that I'm not a specialist in, and having to go back to my own textbooks in my own time to refresh my knowledge, having to come in on my own time to speak to other teams so that I can learn what it is I'm caring for.
And again, they're relying on your goodwill. They're relying on your decency.
Yeah,
they're not actually addressing the clinical needs.
Teach and support juniors caring for patients with ailments that you don't really understand yourself. It's very difficult and it's very scary. And, back in the day, we used to have, a bit like Great Ormond Street, I suppose, our specialist units that did our specialist things. And now it's just kind of everybody's everywhere and you just have to get on with it.
And I don't know I asked previous callers where it's going to end. I hesitate to ask you.
It's so difficult. I literally don't know. I mean, I'm one of those people that I maybe my trust is lucky for, that I basically bang the drum, the advocate for the nurses as much as I possibly can. I'm one of those annoying Jobsworth people that are constantly trying to talk to the seniors, constantly trying to get my point across. And fighting for the best that I can. But of course the energy runs out after a while, and
well, that's what happens next. That's why I stopped using that Chomsky quote, about 18 months ago, because the lad who runs the social media site started taking the mickey out of me. He said, you can't get through your programme without doing that Noam Chomsky quote, or the Martin Niemöller poem about first they came for the socialists, and so I stopped doing both. But that Chomsky, actually the Niemöller poem as well, but the Chomsky quote in particular, I can't see any other analysis that works. I mean, unless someone can tell me what happens next, what is the end result of defunding, demoralising and de-staffing that could possibly be anything other than unless it's all a massive mess by accident, Rosie.
Which is possible.
Yeah, well, it's more than possible.
I mean, it's, like I said, I think people just get frustrated that their voices don't get heard. Or if you are someone like me that is kind of banging the drum, you get a bit labelled as a pain in the bum, basically, and it's kind of like, but you want to look at how we can retain staff and how we can recruit better people and how we can work together. I'm offering you some potential ideas.
Yes.
It's very hard to get them in. People are very reluctant to change, particularly if it requires any kind of funding. Obviously, that's always very difficult. And it just becomes a bit of a challenge. And in the end, you're like, why am I sitting at home in my own time when I should be spending it with my daughter, looking at projects, looking at what other people are doing, putting appeals together to go to my managers, and it all kind of falls on deaf ears. You just get to that point where you're like, oh, whatever then. If you don't care, then I don't care. I'll come, I'll do my job, I'll go home, and I'll keep checking NHS jobs.
And that is what your future looks like. And, of course, that speaks rather grimly of what our future might look like as well. It's 17 minutes after 11. This is difficult for me. I kind of want you to ring me if you think I'm wrong about everything, and persuade me that I might be wrong about not that I might be wrong, that every single nurse I've spoken to so far today is wrong about the NHS, and that people aren't leaving because the circumstances are becoming unbearable, departures which will render those circumstances even worse, and that those circumstances include pay freezes and the abolition of bursaries. And the fear, now increasingly, the worse things get, the worse the fear gets that you might be on duty when something terrible and avoidable happens. I kind of just want an alternative analysis, that's all. Because if we can't find one, then that slightly conspiracy theory flavoured idea that I floated to you earlier this week, on Monday, I think, that Jeremy Hunt is actually, from the point of view of the government, doing a brilliant job, because we're not hearing the voices of the nurses that we've heard from today. We're seeing news coverage that effectively allows him to present a very plausible and professional-seeming exterior. And successfully deny the reality that is being described to us by these nurses today. I don't know where this road leads. And in the absence of any understanding of where this road leads, I would really, really love to acknowledge the existence of at least one other road. If you can help with that, I'll put you on, even if we're talking about something else. If you're busy at the moment, and in an hour from now, you can, from within the NHS, explain why all of the evidence and the anecdotal evidence and the data combine to create this idea that something really horrible is happening. I would bite your arm off. Seriously, I'll let you on at any point between now and 1. I need to hear an alternative analysis of it. And I won't even argue. I'll just listen to you, I promise. Dean is in Mansfield. Dean, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
big fan, first-time caller.
Thank you.
I'm a mental health nurse by trade. I don't work in the NHS, but I used to. I think there are darker and wider forces at work, if you might allow me to explore that.
Yes, of course.
So we're obviously told under this idea of, free market, liberal economics, that as the demand for something goes up and the supply goes down, the amount you pay for it increases. Yet, as nurses, we find quite the opposite, that actually our wages have gone down or worse. And
but there's no profit involved. I mean, I don't know that you've properly reflected the free market ideology because... Well, actually, no, I suppose you have, haven't you? Well, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. It would be money spent. It wouldn't necessarily be money making its way into the pockets of the plebs, would it?
Well, no. But until you consider that, obviously, foundation trusts are expected to make profit.
Yes.
So obviously, the whole point of that was that the money would then be decentralised via NHS England to the CCGs, so on and so forth. Foundation trusts will make profit, and then obviously, generally speaking, the execs and non-execs, even of failing hospitals, still get paid bonus. But at the same time, nurses' wages go down. And I think when you consider who are nurses, if you think that only 12% of NMC registered nurses are male, for example,
yes.
If you consider that most of us are first-time university graduates in terms of socio-economic studies, I think you start looking at things like class warfare, gender inequalities, and then if you look at the workplace conditions in the NHS, I think the exposure to university study, we look around and we see our classmates who go into law, which is a graduate profession, go into medicine, which is a graduate profession, accountancy as a graduate profession, nursing is a graduate profession, and we're exposed to truly awful conditions.
Where's it going to lead?
Social revolution.
Oh.
Or
so I shouldn't dismiss that if I've just spent 10 minutes saying any other alternatives will be very, very welcome. But it's supposed to be an alternative. You know what it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be social revolution.
So I don't mean social revolution in terms that people take apart. I mean in terms of who become nurses, where they work and what we expect from them. And obviously when you consider what our NHS was designed and funded and expected to do at the start, I mean that sort of... And if you consider that health is one of the most important parts of a person's life, I think that's what will change. So I don't mean social revolution in that kind of, Marxist, but I think our expectations, because I think nurses' expectations have changed, which is why so many of us leave the NHS, because it's not somewhere where we think we can do good nursing work. I'm sad to say.
I hear you. I hope you're wrong, but who am I to tell you?
Me too.
I can't.
Me too. I mean, there is a positive side as a nurse, because there are obviously other places where that does value nursing and that does allow you to do the work that we were designed to do, and that does obviously reimburse as well for our time and our expertise and our knowledge. It's just not the NHS today.
Can we put? I mean, if we can't confidently predict forwardly, where would you look? Backwardly, if you see what I mean. Where would you track the decline back to, if you can?
I mean, I'm a new graduate, so right. I know very little, comparatively speaking. I mean, the reduction of the bursaries didn't help. I think the university access has actually been good in terms of social mobility. The downside is that people generally now have to move out of their hometown to study at a university and very rarely go back to that hometown to work in that local hospital. And that's where you see the most acute shortage of registered nurses applying for jobs. So in Mansfield, for example, they've just closed the Mansfield branch of mental health learning. You now have to go to Nottingham. So that means a lot of potential nurses from Mansfield now either don't apply or don't return to Mansfield upon qualification.
I'm on a hiding to nothing on this one, Dean. I mean, literally, I've got...
I'm sorry.
I know you are. I've got one phone line empty, and I've just checked with Beth. We haven't got anyone... Have we anyone to put forward another... I don't understand. I know how naive this makes me sound. How can we live in a country where almost everybody I can find working in the NHS is describing identically the chaos that you're facing?
Could I make it even worse? Could
Yeah,
I give you a couple of reasons?
Go on.
So a good friend of mine who I studied at university with is a infantry officer in the RAF, did a tour of duty in Afghanistan. Likewise, I've got friends that are police. Their numbers of violence and injury relating to their work pales in comparison to that of a mental health nurse in the NHS.
Yeah, I can believe it. I can well believe it.
So West Midlands Police in a quarter of a year reported 600 incidents. The NHS reported 44,000.
Dean, hang in there, mate.
sorry.
Hey? Well, no, I mean, don't apologise to me. The country should be apologising to professionals like you.
Well, I'm a keen nurse advocate, which is why I don't work in the NHS, I'm sad to say.
Yeah,
But the company I do work for, we don't experience this. And actually, we do something very different, and we're very pleased. But we're given the conditions in which to do good work, and then we do it. And I lead teams that do it. So the flip side is that it's actually a very good time to be a nurse. It's just not a very good time to be in the NHS.
I think I understand that, but are you not then part of the privatisation potential problem?
Yes.
Okay.
But am I part of the problem, or am I a symptom of the reality?
Well, I don't know. I actually don't know. I mean, but aren't you proving Chomsky's point that if things get bad enough, then even people like you will say we're better off in the private sector?
Yeah, but and I mean, but when you consider it, if you think it's all public money, and it just makes it worse, doesn't it? Because you think, well, where's the accountability? Because politicians don't seem to care.
Well, why, briefly, because I'm late for the news, why is the company you're doing now doing a better job within the NHS than the publicly funded bits?
So two real reasons.
Yes.
So again, they're all publicly funded.
Yes.
They come to us for a period of treatment and rehabilitation. Two reasons.
So you work in a facility, do you?
Yeah. So
Right.
I'm a manager of a what would be considered like a very small hospital.
Okay.
What happens is when the person who's referred to us comes in, we work from that person back. So we don't look at kind of the infrastructure and the institutional rules and ideologies and say, right, how do we get them to comply with how we run? We look at that person. So if obviously you're a big football fan, I would look at you and say it's important to James that he goes and watches Kidderminster.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm not that big a football fan, but you're quite right. I do follow Kidderminster. Yes.
I never said good football. It's person-centred, James. I'm learning as we go. So
See?
I build your care plan and your transition and your discharge and your optimisation back from what's important to you.
Yes.
I don't get you to fit in around what we have.
But you could be doing that within the NHS, theoretically.
Absolutely.
Just practically you can't at the moment. That's the terror, though, Dean. I've been a brilliant call, like all the others, but that is the sound of someone very persuasively, because you took me with you, explaining why we'd be better off doing certain things in the private sector than in the NHS, but it's not quite what Dean said. He could do all of this in the NHS, but the opportunity isn't there. So the private sector ends up being able to do things that NHS nurses would love to do, but accept that they can't. And if your quality of the work that you do and the care that you provide to your patients is more important to you than anything ideological or political, I don't think I can sit here and give Dean a hard time for making the decision that he's taken. He believes it makes him a better nurse, and I can't find a fault in any of his reasoning. Which is why this is such a potentially scary scenario. It's 11:32. I have two more stories to get through today. We've taken a decision not to continue with the conversation about the NHS because we can't find anybody to explain the current situation that challenges the last 90 minutes worth of calls. Make of that what you will. I promise you that this is a sincere plea for somebody to absorb everything that we've just heard about the NHS from people working within the NHS and without, from both current and former NHS nurses, and not conclude that things are possibly through rank incompetence, more possibly perhaps through deliberate ideological decisions, heading towards almost sort of nightmarish scenarios. I stress again that my own personal experiences of the NHS, while not perfect, have not had anything that's been less than perfect about my experiences with the NHS recently. Absolutely nothing to do with the staff working there. This seems to be one of the few things the whole country can agree on at the moment, that the staff working within the NHS are magnificent. I increasingly wonder whether that magnificence is being not only taken for granted but also exploited. We will return to this, but if you are in the category I've just described, I really do mean it. We'll interrupt whatever conversation we're having, whatever it is that we talk about next. We will interrupt it. If you, as a nurse, can explain to us why the Royal College of Nursing's warning that the NHS is hemorrhaging nurses is not cause for quite as much concern as nurses have been expressing unanimously. That unanimously never happened on this programme. And what will it take to wake us all up to this? 0345 60609 73 is the number that you need, but only, I apologise if this sounds ungrateful, only if you can offer up within the NHS analysis of the situation that is less bleak than the ones we've already heard, OK?